welcome to the next installment of the live series Roundtable events. This is a series that connects some of the world's top engineering leaders to engage in the discussion on hot topics. My name is Sam, and I work for a company called Amicus. We're obviously a specialist technical recruitment agency focusing on JavaScript, TypeScript, Python, DevOps Cloud and ERP. We're joined here by a fantastic group of guests today. So firstly, I'd like to introduce Ben Allen, from the CTO at Laka. Secondly, we have George Paterson. George is the former head of engineering at Concured. Last but not least, we have Nick Goodall. He's the head of engineering at Learnably. How are you guys today? How is everyone?
Very well, thanks.
Thank you.
Good, yeah. I was
Perfect.
wondering what the Ben's T-shirt was, and now I know.
Exactly, a little bit of free sponsorship there. Just for today, the topic that we're going to be discussing is around performance management culture within software engineering. I suppose to kind of get us started really and introduce ourselves, if you could just kind of run through a bit about like your own background and everything on what you're kind of doing currently and the kind of teams you've been managing really. I suppose starting off with yourself, Nick.
So yeah, hi guys, I'm Nick. Like Sam said, I was the head of engineering at Learnably. I'm currently in the job market, kind of looking for what my next gig is going to be. I've bend building and managing teams now for a little over a decade, I think, and all sorts of shapes from iOS, Android, backend, front end, data science, even some product things in the mix as well, various different stacks. I put a lot of focus in sort of the personal development, progression, empowerment, autonomy of teams. I qualified as a coach, so I'm a qualified life and career coach as well. So I could bring that element into my teams and really try and help individuals and teams become more effective and efficient. So that's me.
Perfect. I suppose Ben, if you'd like to continue, what have you been up to recently with Laka?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I'm the CTO and co-founder at Laka. We are an insurance, mobility insurance company based on a collective insurance model. So we do things slightly differently to the rest of the insurance industry. My background is in software development of all kinds across lots of different industries. I've worked for big companies and small companies, but with a focus and bias towards like greenfield development projects. So bringing predominantly cloud and sort of mobile services, if you like, into industries that need a shake-up. So I've done that for tax and accountancy, some education stuff, and most recently with Laka in insurance. So I've done some team management using a lot of offshore teams in the past, up to a couple of hundred people in India, some in Ukraine at one point. Most recently, Laka is all UK based, albeit we are now entirely remote first, distributed across the UK.
Absolutely. It's great to see you kind of coming back to the UK as well. So with yourself, George, in terms of management and everything, what is it you've kind of been up to?
Oh yeah. So again, like the others, over a decade of managing different scales of engineering teams. First in sort of digital agencies, then moving to emphasis where quite large scale, and as Ben said, sort of offshore teams as well. So India quite a lot, and then wanting to get out of that enterprise culture into more the energy of startups and really wanting to build those teams and the product. So over the past 5 years, working in a number of different startups, and at times, having that internal team, but then expanding slightly. Ukrainian teams have been pretty good, Polish and Romanian as well.
Mm-hmm. It seems to be quite a common thing recently, especially for startups, to have an offshore team first and then move to more in-house. Do you reckon that affects like the performance within the squad when you have a mix of on-site and offshore people? Any of you, George?
Yeah, I'll go first. I think actually this is the benefit of remote working. Because if you're working remote, largely it shouldn't matter. Of course, there's going to be some cultural differences and the way people perceive leadership and management and how things work together. But say, for instance, where I was at Concured, the team, there's a big team in Quebec. There were developers in Bangladesh. We had a guy in Iran as well. So, it was quite spread out, and it didn't matter. They could have been in Manchester, Glasgow, Bristol, but remote really helped us. I guess before COVID really turned that on its head, there was, especially say working in Infosys, there would have been, the people in the office talking to the clients were more likely to get that exposure, while the offshore teams in India were not getting that recognition. But I think the tooling and the way that we do things now is definitely changing that.
Absolutely. Would you agree with that, Ben, yourself?
Yeah, for sure. I think the big change that George mentions there is if everybody is remote and you really embrace that idea of remote first, then it doesn't matter where everybody is. And we've found in the past that if you have sort of pockets of people that come together into an office, but some people are remote, then that's when the sort of fractures start to appear between the team, because they will develop some of their own like regional culture around whoever is in that particular location. But yeah, absolutely. We've seen by embracing remote first at Laka that we are fighting that. We do have offices and we do start to see people forming those kind of cliques around offices, and we're trying to make sure that we can embrace that, but also keep everybody feeling that same degree of involvement that you rightly point out, George, is the thing. If everything happens in one place, then it's easy to feel that you're being isolated, whether you're on your own or in a team of like 50 people in that one space.
Absolutely. Was it the same with Learnably while you were there, Nick, or was it? Did you have a different type?
Learnably was entirely in-house, right? So everybody was directly sourced, and like we were also distributed, but I think it's different when you've got an offshore team that's like a group that's outsourced somewhere, as opposed to having one engineer that's from an offshore nearshoring team or something like that, because that changes how the dynamics work, and you have to be much more careful, I guess, with the culture fit when you're bringing somebody into an existing team. Whereas if you've got maybe like a squad that you're going to spin up and you can give them a dedicated piece of work, and you've got decent clarity in terms of how your teams function and what you're expecting, then you can still drive that performance and manage it more effectively across those groups, at least in my experience.
Of course, and that culture side, it can be tough because you don't want to, if someone is a really strong software engineer, you don't want to, but they might not be a culture fit. It can be hard to project them on that basis, where if it was remote, you can kind of be a bit more lenient on that side because you might not have to deal with them as much. Have you found it that way, or am I completely wrong?
I find that one tricky. Like there's always, what's that, the brilliant jerks analogy, you hear it often. And again, it depends on the culture and even the stage of the company that you're in. Early stage, pre-seed, when you're really looking to get things going, you could probably deal with more of that because you need more of that type of energy and people that can maybe go alone for maybe a longer period of time. I guess as you're starting to scale, or at least again, in my opinion, when you're getting more of those people together, and I like collaborative teams, I like people to come together, and if you have that one or two folks that people generally don't want to work with or struggle working with, it can create that negative environment, and that it will impact performance, right? Like I've seen it where you pair two people together for a given piece of work and go like, can't work with George, right? He's just the hogs all of the work or whatever it is, Ben's a great guy, but like he's super passive aggressive or something like that, and it impacts the other player. So there's a fine balance, but I think it goes back to what I was saying. If you've got your values and your criteria set, so you know what those expectations are, then you can measure against it, and you can address those problems as they're coming up, and it'll be more evident when things are not going to plan.
Of course. But have you found that with on the culture side with yourself as well, Ben? Like has it because you're remote first, has it been more difficult, or has it been easier to kind of cultivate a culture of working together?
I think it's different. I think kind of your previous question, like, is it less important when you're remote first? I don't think it is. Like, I think culture, is pervasive across the team, whether they're all sitting in the same room or if they're spread out. And actually, Nick's examples of you find it struggle to work with certain people, that will happen at a distance or not. I think it makes it much harder as a kind of engineering leader to really make the choices, hard choices that you might have to make about those teams, because it's easy to say, oh, but it doesn't matter because they're not in the room, so surely they can get on at a distance. But like, we found for sure that that's not the case. Like, if there is a clash, like, people still have to work together, and whether it's through a Zoom call or across a table, it's still still personalities. There's still a lot of personal investment in the work that we're doing, and so you have to be able to get on with the people that are around you, regardless. And I haven't found it any easier being remote first, I don't think, than we did in the office. In some ways, I find it harder for those reasons that I mentioned, that it's really difficult to kind of think that someone doesn't fit into the team when they're not sort of physically in the team. And it took a little while to really get over that kind of mental or emotional hurdle, that it's still that important, and you need to be able to say, all of these people could coexist in an office together and do good work, like, regardless of the fact that they are not doing that on a day-to-day basis.
Of course, absolutely. Just kind of moving on to more of the kind of performance management side. Like with yourself, George, being like while you were the head of the technology and everything, how do you measure the performance within your teams? Like, what do you think is best practice for that?
I mean, there's probably quite a lot that goes to it. And actually, starting off with perhaps, what is the job spec that the person is going for? Are they a developer, senior developer, lead developer? So that it's clear what they should be doing to achieve their role, but also, where they can go to the next level. So providing that kind of structure and guardrails around, expectations of what you're going to do. So, that whole kind of KPIs and OKRs and things like that, and the whole DORA metrics, where you're looking at frequency of deployment, or you could be looking at the KPI side. You could be looking at unit testing for code, or you could be looking at something else, and something perhaps that I find useful with remote is the kind of show and tell kind of presentations, and also not just within the technology team, but doing that for outside to sort of product or commercial, so that there's good communications going on. There isn't a simple answer, but I would say, setting out the sort of structure for how people can grow and being clear around expectations is probably a key thing.
I think that last point is really prevalent as well, especially with startups as well. Like, there can be a fine line between what's like a mid-level and a senior level for people. Like, I've spoken to a lot of mid-level engineers myself who have been kind of thrown into the deep end, so to speak. So for yourself, Ben, like, how do you, I suppose, if someone isn't kind of perform or is in a different kind of structure to, let's say, a senior engineer, how would you manage them compared to like a senior person in terms of what they want to do, or sorry, in terms of like their level and everything?
Yeah, I think it's actually a problem that we've wrestled with a bit at Laka in the last probably 6 to 9 months, in that we have ended up with a bias towards relatively inexperienced people in the team, and that, in a remote context, has opened up these kind of areas where you might have expected people to develop very quickly has not happened as fast as it would have done in other cases, or if they've been again in a room together. And so identifying where those gaps are and really providing the support that those people need has become like paramount to us. So helping people with like embracing more pairing or mob programming and that kind of thing. So we're sharing the knowledge in a semi-structured way, and it's okay to request that. So I'm not sure about how I'm going to solve this problem. Can I have some help? And people will jump in again, sort of emulating the way that might have happened in an office, but just saying, put my hand up in Slack. I need some help. Can you help me? And yes, I can. So it's sort of about pushing, making sure that people aren't being left to fend for themselves. And I think there is always a tendency, I find it a lot in engineers, that, well, I can fix this, that I can solve this problem, like I should be able to do it. And so without that kind of casual, hey, like nudging someone next to you, like, can you just check I'm doing this right? This sounds right, but is it right? You've got to find other ways to formalize that casual conversation that would otherwise happen, which feels really awkward. And particularly, I think for junior people, it can feel like, oh, I've got to go and bother someone who's obviously got something more important to do than help me, and actually really driving the message that you getting better, doing more by yourself, as in being capable of doing that, is as valuable to the rest of the team as you just sitting there for a day hoping that you'll like stumble across the solution to the problem, etc. So I think it's about creating that safe space and making sure that they all feel it, rather than this kind of, oh, well, that person's got something better to do or more important to do than help me.
That's actually a really good point. As well, it's actually something that I've been we were discussing quite often that here at like in just recruitment in general, just asking for help. Some people can be quite afraid to do it at times. But like you said, you might think that there's somebody, like they might have more important things going on. I was going to ask you a similar question just around in terms of dealing with kind of younger members and everything. What was it that you used to do to kind of get them on track? Maybe if they were performing a bit poorly or they weren't doing what you knew they were capable of?
I don't know if there's any one size fits all. I'd echo a lot of what these guys have already said. Like, once you've got your expectations set and you've got the clear guidelines that teams can work around, and twofold for me, there's capabilities and then there's the behavioral side of things, sort of the values, culture side of things that you want to make sure that you have good clarity around that. And then it's understanding what that individual is needing. Is it a mentor, right? Is it, like Ben was saying, they need to be pair programming more often, so they've got someone there that they can have another set of eyes that they can bounce off really, really quickly? Is it, being thrown into the deep end and having to manage a piece of work or feature or something where they have to take on more responsibility? So it really depends on what that need is. I find, well, at least for me, the junior or less senior folks are the easier ones to generally manage, because they are maybe a little bit more malleable. They want all of this information. Where you get to the more senior guys and they all know, and again, even for myself, I've managed a bunch of folks that are far more experienced than I am in a given piece of technology. There's not a lot that I can go tell them. So it becomes a different conversation, and there's different techniques and different tools that I would use to sort of manage that performance piece. But I guess that, again, for me, the key things is understanding that individual, finding out what they want and what they need to get to the space that you want to get them to, and then give them a clear path to that, right? If it's a capability failing, create a small, like, it doesn't have to be like a formal performance plan or whatever it is, but over the next week, this is what we're going to do, right? I want you to pay at least 60% of your time, right, coding time, with somebody else, right? And that's something that's easily measurable, and you can create a feedback loop with that, going, okay, I'm going to ask Ben to give feedback from, like, on a daily basis, like, how was that pairing session, right? And like 3 questions, answer these 3 questions, right? Was it productive, collaborative? Did you see an improvement in X, Y, and Z? So you can create that reflection space. And that, for me, is when you generally see people start to improve, or you'll have to take more, more serious action to actually make a change or make a decision.
Absolutely. And something I was gonna mention, because obviously the term micromanagement, everyone seems to hate it. Like nobody wants to be micromanaged or anything like that. But at the same time, sometimes certain people kind of need it themselves. Like, how do you, as a manager, George, like, how do you kind of give constant kind of feedback, regular feedback, and stay on top of someone, but also not be kind of in that kind of micromanagement kind of side? What's your kind of way of working around that?
This is going to depend on the person, because some people, perhaps they're more senior or think they're more senior and they're set in their ways, and perhaps that's more difficult to change. But generally, you've brought people on, developers, to be able to solve problems, and you want them to solve problems, and you want to direct them to solving the problems that help the business grow or change in a positive way. So yeah, micromanagement is just not enabling them to solve those problems. I've been in situations where people have gone off and wrote this beautiful piece of code, but it's not related to what we're trying to do. So you might be looking at it from just the kind of product management kind of side of it. So say if you've got Kanban and you're breaking down those features, you want to make sure that whatever's developed is aligned with those features. Depending on the individual, that may be that you may want to do some pair programming with them to just guide them towards what you're expecting, or you get someone that's a senior dev that can help them in this particular area. Or I guess basically you can't drag someone in and drag a horse to water. You've got to show them, you've got to guide them, and hopefully they go in the direction you hope. If not, then that is where you come into the more structured relationship with the developer.
Absolutely. Ben, what are your kind of thoughts on that?
No, I agree with a lot of what George said there, and I think micromanagement is like a negative kind of term, right? And I think it very much is an individual thing. It depends what you want and need, and what your developers and your team want to need. Like some people want to be, what you might consider to be spoon-fed. Like, here's all of the detail, but like we're going to walk through it step by step, and you're going to go off and do it. And they need that, and like particularly with junior level people, they need that reassurance that they've gone right through the entire process of how and where and why they're going to deliver a piece of work. And then as developers get more experience, then that will happen less and less. But that doesn't mean they don't want or need a regular check-in. And I think it comes back to like that classic idea in a stand-up should be checking in, not checking on. Like, are you okay? Have you got everything? Do you understand it? You confident in that? But not, oh, are you sure you're doing it? It's like, have you thought of this? Are you considering that? Which that's when for me, it starts branching into micromanagement. Some people don't need me to tell them how to do it. And if I do, then I'm patronizing them. And I don't mean to, but it will be perceived that way. And I think, as George said, you've got to find the balance for the right people in the right time and say, this is what you need, and so I will give it to you. And yeah, there's as with anything, like managing people, there's an art form to it, and that is one of the elements of that art form, I think.
Absolutely. Nick, do you agree on that topic, or do you have any kind of to add to that?
No, I think I would echo a lot of what the guys are saying here. It's
Nice.
it is. I think the one element is probably like, this is where I would look at hiring, and like who you bring into the space as well. Again, it's like, if you get it right and you get the culture spaces up front, and you bringing in people that align more with how you want to do things, you will get less of that, it's micromanagement, because people will see it more as like, I understand Ben's coming in because he's supporting me. George is here because he's helping me grow and move towards the next stage of performance, as opposed to it being you're being patronizing and things like that. And you don't always get it right. It's going to happen. You're going to find those where somebody's going to come across. And there's that trust and relationship building that also has to happen, right? Especially with new people that are going to come in. You're going to ruffle some feathers, and this is again part of that burden of leadership, right? You need to be prepared that you are going to do this from time to time, and just how you manage that and how you handle that type of feedback for people.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it is situational and individual.
Absolutely.
Perhaps there's something to add to that. Like where you said ruffle some feathers, And I think, ideally you don't want to. You want the person to do it, but sometimes you do need to ruffle feathers, and you have to choose when to do that. It can be difficult.
Yeah,
absolutely. Has it happened before in the past where you might have ruffled a feather or two, but and then you realize after, like the aftermath, you were like, oh, I shouldn't have, probably shouldn't have pushed on that too much.
I think between the three of us, if we've not done this in the past 10, 12 years, we've not been managing properly. The 100% done it.
Definitely. Just to something you said there, Nick, about like the importance of hiring properly. What is it like that? Is there any red flags you guys see in the interview process that you're like, okay, this is something that I just know it's not going to gel together? I suppose with yourself, Nick.
I mean, there's a few things. It's interviews. I always find that difficult, right? Because it's difficult to get a fair and accurate reflection of what you're going to be doing on a day-to-day basis, and putting somebody in any situation like that, it's pressurized, right? Like at Learnably, we did a take-home code review, and then so like you just had to go and review some code, fix a couple of tests, nothing too crazy. And then when you came into the actual technical task, it was a pair programming exercise where you had to extend that same piece of code. So you would have had eyes on it, you had time. But even in those instances, like people were still under pressure, like and not comfortable. You're pairing with a new person. So you had to find ways that you're going to go, okay, these are the things we're kind of looking for. These are markers. Like what language are we trying to look for from this person? Are they going to ask questions? Like one of my big things, if someone doesn't ask any questions, that's always a flag for me, right? Like I'm expecting you to engage, especially in a pair programming session. Don't just look at it as a one-sided thing. I have to write all of the code and someone else is going to sit over my shoulder and just watch me. So like, yeah, there's types of things like that. I don't know what else would be like a big red flag for me. I had one person once that tells me that he learned everything he needed to learn, so he's tired of learning. That was a red flag. Especially when you're interviewing for a learning company, it didn't go down all the way. Yeah, can't think of another one.
Well, what about yourself, Ben? Is there stuff you see in interviews sometimes that you're like, I wish you hadn't said that?
I mean, I'm sure there are. Like we lean quite hard into trying to find people who we feel would be a good cultural fit, like rather than laboring too hard on the technical things. Like obviously, well, there's some base level understanding, but I don't know about red flags, like not off the top of my head, but I'm sure there must be some in there. But we tend to find a lot of the things that Nick just said. Like if you're not asking questions, if you're not really engaged with the topic at hand, then that is cause for concern at least. And we do these kind of problem solving exercises. So it's a real semi real world kind of situation. It's loosely based on some of the problems we might be facing in a business or in our technical platform at any given moment. So we sort of work it up around those things, and then we kind of spitball with people. That's kind of how it works. So talking about, oh, how would you do this? And oh, that's interesting. Like, oh, have you done that before? Like, oh, what technology have you used? And sort of trying to draw people into areas that they feel comfortable, so that they will talk, find something that's passionate. And I guess if there is a red flag, it's that closed sort of awkward conversation, and you never find that thing where someone goes, oh, you want to talk about that? Yeah. Oh, cool. I love this because and whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. It could be a particular language. It could be some obscure language that of course we're never going to use, but if you're into it, then at least it shows a spark, and that's the thing that we kind of look for. So more a big green flag when we hit it rather than a terrible red if we don't find that.
Absolutely. So something obviously that it's going to be constantly changing, and it's obviously probably changed a lot in the last 10 years, but obviously different generations and how they react to feedback. Like how do you deal with George, like yourself, like obviously been managing for the last over 10 years now, so how do you deal with, like, let's say a younger person coming in compared to, I suppose, someone who's a bit more experienced with it, who could probably handle maybe the bad sides of stuff a tiny bit more? Have you had to deal with this before in the past, or your techniques, or this is case by case?
Yeah, yeah, providing feedback is a good way of helping the developer kind of move forward. And I think maybe Ben had said it before, that you've got to provide context. You've got to provide understanding and reasoning why. Most developers will take a logical argument that is sourced with good information and come to it and understand it. Because, code is, you do things in a certain way, not because it's your way, but because this is, perhaps the most efficient way. And you usually have, third parties that can validate that for you. So I tend to structure it in that kind of logical way, how change could be made and why change could be made. And I'd usually go towards, the positive side of it, looking for improvement. So, it might be a piece of code on a website. And I've seen a lot of people, I like React, I like components like that, but sometimes when solving an issue, especially a junior developer, they'll throw everything at it. And you'll end up with megabytes on the page. If you strip that down and actually ask them, what is the thing that you're trying to solve, and then solve it with the minimum code that you need, sometimes you can show them actually, okay, this is where you get the performance increase, the stability, it's a less complex item, and kind of show them why and how. Yeah.
Of course. What Nick, your what are your thoughts on that, on what George just said?
I mean, I agree with those points. I think what I tend to do is like give lots of feedback, right? Because you want to create a culture of continuous feedback. And like I always try to give my teams frameworks that they can use, and I'll throw multiple frameworks at them because different people will be comfortable with different things. Like George says, somebody might like it in a more logical fashion. Somebody would want something a little bit more light. Here's a couple of bullet points, but it's very clear, it's contextual. There's an example. The feedback's got to be in a timely fashion. So if something happens today, I will give you feedback today, right? And make sure that feedback is there and that people can see it. And like things I've done, like encouraging my teams to give at least one person feedback once a week, right? So everybody gets into it and start off slowly. Like I want everybody to give somebody feedback. I don't care who it is, doesn't even have to be in the same team, but give one piece of positive feedback. And you do that every week for like a couple of weeks, and then move on to the next thing. Now let's try and do something where you give some constructive criticism to somebody around something too. Because that's generally like almost every business I've been, everybody's super happy to pat each other on the back and go, hey, good job, love that, that was great. When something goes wrong, like silence, you don't see it. It's just the management that comes down and goes, hey guys, what's happening? Like this wasn't great, that happened. And that peer feedback just falls away. And it's so much more impactful when your peers are going, hey Nick, like why did you do this? Like I didn't understand this. This is how it impacted my day to day, or I wasn't able to complete my task because you did these things. Maybe next time we could have a conversation, something like that. And building that culture makes people less resistant and less defensive to feedback when it becomes like just the norm. You're going to get these pieces. I understand it. And one of the other things I also do, if I know I have to give somebody really tough feedback, that's going to be difficult, I will go to that person beforehand and say, look, I've got something that I've got to talk to you about. It's not going to be great, right? We're going to have, it's going to be a difficult conversation. So you give them a chance to prepare themselves. They don't come into the meeting and then get defensive. They'll be there and go like, okay, this is going to suck. I'm not going to be like, and then you go into it, have a chat, and then give them a chance to go and think about it and provide support in that space. Like, okay, so how are we going to get out of this? How are we going to help resolve this or get you to the next stage or whatever it may be? And it, in my experience, at least, it helps move forward.
Was there a noticeable difference in, like, I suppose, morale and work when you did the making everybody give like constructive feedback to a different person in the team? Was there much of a difference in the kind of morale or anything?
I wouldn't say like it varies, right? Because some folks really appreciate it and others, because everybody knew I was doing it. Some people just saw it's like, it's just another thing you got to do, right? But like the outcome wasn't so much for them to that sort of positive impact. It was the habit building of like feedback is part of our culture. It's what we do, right? It's an important reflection loop that we need to close on a regular basis, positive and sort of negative or unfavorable, right? So that's what I wanted to get to. And like for me, the success was seeing overall feedback increase, so that it wasn't a matter of things only happen like, oh, we released a new feature, everybody gets a pat in the back. It was like every week you saw people coming back in and going, hey, this was great, but it could have been better if we did X and Y and Z. Stuff like that. So that for me was the real winning metric.
It's a great idea, actually. I think you could implement that in the majority of industries as well, not just tech. For yourself, Ben, like, what kind of tips would you give for people who have to give, I suppose, negative feedback to somebody, or kind of constructive criticism?
I think Nick hit the nail on the head with the like full warning. Like any difficult conversation that I've ever had to have with someone, I will try and telegraph it, even if it's something that you can't sort of give too much advance warning. At least start the conversation with some, big hints as to what's coming. It's almost like I'm sure we've all had to let people go. And you go into a meeting, you can't necessarily tell them in advance, so you start off talking about all the reasons why you might let someone go. So they're not going, oh, is this what's happening now? So by the time you get to it, they're like, oh yeah, I thought that was what's going to happen. And I think just that sense of sort of understanding and being like in it with you really makes a difference. So if you can give someone a heads up in any description, in any way, for an awkward conversation, then you should. And I think feedback is the most regular example we have of that in any team. So I don't have too much to add beyond what Nick said otherwise. But I will say I do very much like that idea of being able to elicit sort of constructive feedback in the team, and I think it shows a really positive culture that you can do that, because it could really descend into this kind of name calling and finger pointing exercise if the team isn't in a good place. So I definitely will consider trying to instigate something like that, because I think we have a very safe space within our engineering team at Laka, and so there's no very, very much not a blame culture. If something bad happens, then we're all in it together and we'll fix it. But I don't think we've ever gone to that next level of saying, right, well, you actually did make a mistake. Let's like break it down in a bit more detail. It's just a kind of, yeah, it's okay, don't worry, we're all in it, we'll help you fix it. And I think there is a learning exercise in there that perhaps we're missing, which that exercise that Nick described sounds really, really interesting.
Definitely. George, what are your would you have kind of similar outlook on giving people feedback, or how do you normally operate?
Yeah, so I was just thinking about the negative feedback, because you have to provide, something's gone wrong. And I was just remembering, like years back, the first time I was running a project and it ran right up until Friday. That classic kind of deployment, before continuous integration, deployment on a Friday, because you're trying to write code. And as a developer, you're thinking, yeah, I can do this. I can get this deployed. And you just keep going and trying to do it. And then it didn't work out. And then the next week, talking to the product director and about what went wrong. And I got that negative feedback. But actually, that negative feedback then came with look, you should have just asked for help. Because that's where the rest of the team is. The team is there to provide help. Developers can be quite bad at asking for help and talking about feedback and things like that. So, and I think Nick said it earlier, yeah, there's something that's gone wrong, but we're a team, and we're trying to work together. So, identify what went wrong and then identify how to fix it, and then how to, not have that problem again, hopefully.
Of course, absolutely. It's always that's always a desirable to never have problems, but I imagine in everyday life it's a bit hard to avoid. Just in terms of kind of going back to like the ethics and everything within management, like how as someone, obviously I'm not a manager myself. I hope to be at some stage, but obviously dealing with different personalities, when someone kind of, like, I suppose you kind of get through that with the interview process in terms of culture and everything to make sure that they align with you, how you view, I suppose, working together. But in terms of like with obviously diversity and inclusion, making sure that people have equal opportunities, how do on the kind of culture aspect, some people might be a bit shyer and everything. How do you get them ingrained into the culture when they might be a bit averse to kind of speaking out of turn? I suppose Ben, what would you kind of, how would you kind of get people involved with those type of things when they might be a bit shyer?
I think it's a really tricky like challenge because you find I think maybe more so in engineering, there's quite a lot of introverted people who are very, very talented. They've got very valid and strong opinions, but they're not going to bring them to the fore in a sort of group setting. And I think the challenge is finding other ways to give them that outlet. I think if you force people who are very uncomfortable talking or discussing something in a large group to chip in, like, it's easy to sit on a call like this or anything else and say, hey, what do you think about this? But if they're not comfortable doing that, you're not doing them any favors by bringing that out of them. You've got to find another way to bring it back. So we use, and certainly I've used it in the past, using sort of online collaboration tools is a great way because you don't have to speak, you don't have to say it, you can just add a comment, add a chat, like add some extra things into it, and those kind of lightly disconnected mechanisms for bringing out group thought seems to work well for us in a lot of different contexts, particularly where we're dealing with some junior people, but also when we're dealing with people who are perhaps non-technical. So when we're having brainstorming sessions around a product requirement that has some engineering influence, then we want our product managers to feel comfortable and confident to ask what might be seen to be a silly question in context. And I think those tools really provide an opportunity to do it in a way that actually I would struggle certainly more so to do in an in-person environment. So.
No, that's fantastic. I think those online collaboration tools are really handy, even if it's like a separate like a forum or something where people can leave anonymous tips or anonymous suggestions. That's something that's worked for us here at Amicus. How do you kind of operate around that, Nick, yourself, when you've been managing?
Again, I think it comes down to that relationship building and understanding the people that you're working with, because you could do things like, again, especially I found as well, like in the remote world, people will switch cameras off, right? So you can see that they're not wanting to engage, like especially when you get big groups. So you could do things where you could have smaller groups, right? And then have that person or people in a more comfortable space, like there's 4 of us here or 3 of us, have a conversation, and then one person that's more comfortable can take the sort of the speaking role and then bring that to the team, right? So you can do different things, like Ben says, those collaboration tools, and try and be creative with things like have a portion of your retrospective that's silent, right? Everybody has to use the tool and you can't say anything for 15 minutes, right? So empowering all these people that like to just sit quietly and go and think about what they're doing and type up all of their post-it notes or whatever it is. It can type of a paragraph if you want, and just creating that kind of space for people to really collaborate and be themselves, and feel comfortable and feel like they can fail and they're not going to be judged by their peers or by their managers. And that is probably where I think it becomes really crucial. If they feel like they don't have to be camera on, you can see me, I'm standing here, I'm loud, like I'm loud, I'm an extrovert, I'm out there. Not everybody's going to behave like that. So give them that space. And then again, like I'll do things, I like to challenge folks, say, can you run this project? Again, not everybody's comfortable doing that. They don't want to be in that space. So what other opportunities can I as a leader find to give this person that same level of impact and growth and exposure, and I can stretch them as an individual for their growth. So like I have to figure out what those challenges are going to be and see how I can help them in that space.
Absolutely. I completely agree. George, do you have any thoughts on that subject?
Yeah. So I was thinking, actually, I think Nick touched on it, the idea of psychological safety. So people feel comfortable. Even say, talking to myself, a junior developer should feel comfortable raising an idea or asking me a question. Also, collaboration tools are good. Miro boards, even Slack, actually, just for asking questions in a way that isn't perhaps more extroverted. And I have had, I don't mind if people have cameras on or off. Sometimes I find staring at a camera is quite draining. So I won't mind if people turn their cameras off. I want to see them once in a while just to make sure they're doing well, but it doesn't have to be on. Some of the things like Scrum rituals, so retrospectives, even if you don't do sprints, it's a good mechanism for making people think about how things are done, and perhaps we don't get to put post-it notes on a board if you're doing remote, but putting up your ideas on a board and then people voting for them. Actually, it might be that your idea is really good. And then the last one, perhaps more prevalent when you're in office and you're doing a stand-up during the morning. I have picked up teams where that stand-up has been dominated by a couple of individuals, and I've just had to come in there and make sure that everyone is getting their allocated time to talk and provide feedback. And that may mean stopping people halfway through their conversation because they're running over their time, and actually just offering the floor up to someone else. And by showing people that, after a while they begin to do that anyway.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, I really agree with that last point as well about having to. Sometimes you just need to kind of stop people from speaking, because I know different personalities and everything. Like it happens in every office, I imagine. But some people are just louder than others. It can be hard for even for myself. I'm quite an extroverted person, but at the same time, I just let other people speak. I join in when I can, but I know it's the same in a lot of offices. Just I suppose on a more kind of upbeat side, but more on like the promotion side and everything. What after, like, because I know I've seen it in people's careers in different industries, recruitment, whether it's tech, people can get promoted quicker than they're expected to. Like, let's say they have a target of 6 to 12 months of getting that promotion. Some people can do it in 3. Obviously, with recruitment, a lot of that is based on like numbers and billings and everything, but in terms of software engineering, how do you know someone is ready to progress to the next level? Maybe a bit earlier than expected. Ben?
It's an interesting question. I think I find a lot these days that it's almost the opposite problem, in that there's a high expectation for rapid ascent through promotions. And I think I like to think that maybe it's different in engineering to other like job roles, but maybe it's not. But like there's a real value that comes in experience, and you can be a really gifted like technologist. You can really get to the crux of whatever language or platform you're working in, but if you haven't seen some weird bug that should never happen in the real world like before, then you don't know how to fix it. And I think I used to characterize this as a sort of debugging being a dying art, in that I ran into lots of developers who, like, faced with a problem that was really out of the box, they just were lost. And I think that is the biggest struggle for me, is really how to sort of elucidate those kind of ideas for developers who might see their friends progressing fast in other companies or in other disciplines, and saying, well, I've been doing this for 6 months, like surely I should be to the next level now. And sometimes it's because we are not able to give them the experience. They haven't seen the things. Something hasn't happened that I would expect a developer at the next level to really get through. And it does happen the other way. So to go back to your specific question, like there will be people who can demonstrate a depth of knowledge, but in my experience, they stand out. They're bright shining stars in the team that everybody, even more experienced developers, will be going, oh, I need to go and ask like Dave about that because he really knows, like he's the guy. And that does happen. But I think really effectively get back to what we talked about right at the beginning of the call, right? Effectively managing expectations of what a role is and what the next role is. And I'd put my hand up and say we could be much better at Laka at doing that, because we have grown from a very small team into a relatively small team, and we're still finding where those lines get drawn, and they get more and more blurry as we kind of grow, because again, there's relevant experience and there's irrelevant experience to those things, and it makes it really tough. But it's about being as clear as you can be, saying these are the things that I'd expect you to be able to do. And it's quite fun at times to have a conversation with a developer who is ostensibly doing well, and talk about things that have happened in your own career, and sort of this sort of retrospective. Oh, you remember what time when I did this, and this sort of wide eyes, like I can't imagine, like how did you let that happen, and how did you possibly get out of it? And it's I really enjoy those kind of conversations, because it makes you sort of reminisce about the what now in retrospect are fun times. At the time with awful, terrible career-ending possibles, but it's fun to talk to people about those things and really sort of give them the benefit of experience that maybe as a company, given our relative size, we're unable to give them on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely, it's a great point as well, because I was just curious, because I see a lot from obviously recruiting engineers every day, but there's so many people who have like 4 years experience and they class themselves as like a senior. And there's people who have like 8 or 9 years experience and they still would be like, maybe I'm like just about a senior now. So it can be quite tough. But Nick, what are your kind of thoughts on that yourself?
Man, it's such a mess, really. I think Ben hit it, like the shining stars, like you come across them, you spot them, and you go, this person's underpaid. We need to make sure, like, we need to sort them out. We need to get them up to that level or whatever it is. But the market itself creates that, because a senior for me and a senior for Ben are going to have different, like, descriptions in businesses, right? We will have an idea of what we think this is, and we'll probably be reasonably closely aligned, but there's going to be differences, right? And this is what I find in, like, I've had those conversations go like, I want to be a senior in 6 months. And you go, I don't think that's going to work out. And here's some examples, right? These are the seniors in the business. This is where we see you. And then that person will then transition out and be like, okay, you guys don't see me as a senior. Company X does. And then they'll go off to company X. But it's a different, like, I always like to think I want to be demanding. I want to create this environment where we're going to be challenged. And that might sometimes lead to people being not accelerating as fast as they might or would in another space. But that's because that challenge is. And again, that clarity, I always use the spheres of influence or impact. So I like to talk to people around, like, especially for like the junior or associate level, your spheres of influence may be going to be 1 or 2 folks in your team. If you're really impacting the whole team, you're doing a really good job and you can see stuff's happening. When you're looking at mids, I want you to be impacting across guilds, chapters, whatever it is, more than just your own squad. Seniors, it gets even wider, tech leads, architects, and so on and so forth. So you can give them that playbook and go, this is where we see you, and have that reflection, right? Like the transparency, I think, is a big thing. Like if somebody asks me, I will be extremely honest and go, this is where I see you and this is why. If you don't believe that, like, let's talk, let's work it out. Where do you see the discrepancies? And let's manage that. I had a junior developer once, this is many years back now, and we'd drawn up like a progression framework, and it had 4 levels, like from proficient, intermediate, advanced, and mastery. And basically you had to go home, do some like thinking, and come back and rate yourself across all of these things. And he was a grad, and he came back and he marked himself as a master for like 5 out of the 6 things. And I went, okay, right, challenge accepted. I basically threw him in the deep end at something, and he came back to me like after days, like, okay.
You realized he wasn't a master after that day.
Yeah, well, I mean, I love the attitude, but like he was completely off the mark. But like we had to calibrate that, right? Come to that understanding, like
Absolutely.
this is where we are. Maybe I'm, there's things that I'm not seeing because I'm not in your everyday all of the time, and you need to make that more visible, and then we can figure out how we work that in, and then we look at this is what a growth path would look like, and then it's up to that individual to decide whether that's going to work for them or not.
Absolutely. I suppose, George, do you have any kind of final thoughts on that topic?
I mean, it is tricky, and I think as both Ben and Nick have said, it really there's no consistency between what a developer is, a senior developer, a lead developer. There's a general kind of idea, but it's just not there, so it's very difficult. Making it clear expectations is useful, and that kind of job spec, so that people understand what they are expected to do. Enabling them to understand what the progression process is also very useful. But sometimes developers going to find themselves in a company where they jump up levels because they just happen to be in the right place at the right time. Doesn't mean they've got the experience. They just happen to be there. And I guess the last thing to add on there is I think it's becoming a bit more recognized now that actually progression isn't just you become a line manager. There is the role of the individual contributor as well, where they could be a specialist in their area and helping other teams out rather than line managing. But I know in larger companies this has happened, but I think it's starting to be more prevalent in smaller companies as well, and recognizing that value.
Absolutely. I think my biggest takeaway from this whole conversation, to be honest, is that communication, no matter what level you are or anything, is really the key to making everything transition smoothly, whether it's like communication on feedback or making sure everyone knows, or just on standards and expectations, really. That's kind of the main thing for myself that I've taken away. Does anyone have any kind of final thoughts before we head off today? No, that's absolutely fine. Well, look, thanks everyone for jumping on the call. The full recording for this will be available on YouTube and our LinkedIn. But it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you guys today. Sorry for the little technical issues at the beginning, but have a great evening, and yeah, I'm sure we will all speak again. Thanks very much.
Very much.
Cheers, folks. Nice meeting you all.
Bye now.
Bye.